Hi, everyone. So in this video, we're going to go over the Ronson quiz, so quiz 4. But before we do that, just a couple of announcements. Pull up my screen. So if we take a look at week 7, the checklist here. So Wednesday, you uploaded your rough draft and you're using the special template. And then you performed peer review as the homework. So here I just wanted to re-emphasize the navigation guide that'll help lead you through um, uploading your feedback so that your partner has access to that. So if we take a quick look at the navigation guide. So first, right, you access the rough draft link. And so for our purposes, this will be SA2 now. And then to the right of the screen here, you will see this image, right? So submission, it will say what time you submitted it. And what's important for our peer review is this kind of smaller type. I don't know why it's so small, but assigned peer reviews. And so far we've been just doing a single partner. So you'll see one name there. And what's important here is when you click on the name, it is going to bring up the peer review section. And on the left side, you will see the document that your partner uploaded. That's their rough draft. And for our purposes, we're ignoring this view feedback, right? So we will not be going into view feedback. I don't think for any of our peer reviews, actually. Okay, so steer clear of that. And then once you have downloaded your peer review worksheet and completed it, saved it, and you're ready to upload that for your partner, you're going to upload it here, attached file. Okay, what's important here is that you are still under the peer review section, right? So if you go back out of this, then you'll simply come back in, right? You'll click again on the writer's name and it's to their submission, right? So you should see peer review here. It's to their submission that you want to upload your feedback, right? What you don't want to do is upload that feedback to your own submission here, right? Because if you do that, if you attach it to your own submission, your partner does not have access to it, right? So this is a really important move. So make sure you follow that really closely when you're performing peer reviews. Okay, so now we're going to shift over and start reviewing then our responses for the Larson quiz. If we take a quick look at our checklist. So I have the link for the video assignment here. And so actually I've adjusted the schedule a bit. So since I wasn't able to record the videos until now, then the assignment that'll be due by the end of the day Friday is completing these video reviews of quizzes 4 and 5, quizzes that covered Ronson and Larson. And then what we'll do is the homework for Monday will be the reading quiz. So you'll have over the weekend to take that quiz. And so that will allow you time to think carefully about some of the sample responses we're going to take a look at. And that can help be part of your preparation for the synthesis quiz, where you'll be asked to put Ronson and Larson into conversation together. And so reading quiz 6, it's going to have questions very similar to what we saw in reading quiz 3, where we put Gladwell and who into conversation. So questions like, if how would Ronson respond to some of the claims that Larson makes and vice versa? Okay, so if we come back out to our week 7 module, so here under resources and handouts, I'll have this PDF that we're going to look through available for you. So once everybody takes or completes the video activities, then I'll publish that and you'll have access to it. Okay, so we'll go ahead and take a look. So again, these are examples of strong quiz responses for the Ronson quiz. And a couple of notes before we get started. So according to writing program policy, and this is the case across all sections of basic comp as well as all sections of XPOS, 70% is considered passing. And so for us, that means on the quizzes as well as the essays, right? So a passing score for the essays is also a 70%. Okay, so we're aiming then obviously for 70% or higher on our quizzes. Okay, and also just a note, so the ideas expressed in the quiz responses here can certainly help you as you're thinking about how you're going to revise your rough draft of essay 2 as you head toward the final draft. But you want to be careful that you don't plagiarize, right? So while you can certainly draw upon the ideas presented in the responses below, as you rethink your rough draft for essay 2, you cannot use the particular wording and sentence structure that the writers of the responses below use to express their ideas. So if the wording or the sentence structure is too close to the original responses, then you will have committed plagiarism. Okay, so what that means, and this is the case, right, even when we're taking when we're trying to paraphrase or summarize from our text, right, from Ronson or Larson. So even if you take a sentence from a text or from one of these quiz responses and you change out every single word, right, and then just insert synonyms that mean basically the same thing. If you do that, it's still plagiarism, right? Not a single word could be the same as the original sentence, but it would still be plagiarism. And the reason for that is because you've plagiarized their sentence structure, right? That structure is still there. You've just inserted different words, right? So you want to be really careful to just you really process and translate that idea into your own words and your own sentence structure. Okay, so question 1, this was worth 15 points. So nice people like us had effectively sentenced Justine Sacco to a year's punishment for the crime of some poor phraseology in a tweet, as if some clunky wording had been a clue to her secret inner evil, Ronson writes. Okay, and so here, right, based on the context of this passage, what particular group of people is Ronson referring to by us? And here we want to make sure that we are as specific as possible. And this is definitely a Unit 2 question, right? Finding the assumptions. And one of the main assumptions that a writer makes is based on their audience, right? So their particular target audience, who they're trying to reach, whose opinions they're trying to change or viewpoint. The writer makes assumptions about what those target readers think or assume, right? What are their values? What are their viewpoints? And so this idea of, who does Ronson have in mind as us is really important then for Unit 2. And why does he include the phrase as if, and how would the sentence read differently if that phrase weren't there? Okay, so our sample response here. So by using the word us, he means people who are active on social media shaming in pursuit of social justice. Oh, that was not meant to be open. Thank you. Trying to get it out of the way. And so this was important, right? So if you said social media users, you're on the right track, but that's too general, right? So Ronson wants to target specifically social media users who are online shaming in the pursuit of social justice, right? So shaming in the pursuit of social justice was the other important component, right? So it's particularly the people he identifies with, right? Who he's trying to reach by saying, right, with his argument, we have to distinguish between what he calls serious and unserious transgressions, right, and punish accordingly. Okay, so Ronson also considers himself a social justice person, and we get the quotation in which he does that. Ronson says, I wrote about Justine not because I identified with her, although I did, but because I identified with the people who tore her apart. I consider myself a social justice person. It was my people abusing our power. Okay, so he says he wrote about Justine because he identifies with the people who criticized her for the tweet. He considers himself a social justice person, and he uses us for everyone who consider themselves as social justice people. Okay, so just a little note. So we want to make sure that when we move to the second part of our response, that we really offer kind of a definition of what as if means, right? And this is to emphasize the importance of using Google, of using online dictionaries to make sure that our close readings are as accurate as possible. And that's something we're going to see over and over again as we review these different responses to these questions. So he includes the phrase as if in that sentence because the phrase means, right? And so the writer is going to, okay, well, here's what as if means because I've looked it up, right? I've done that kind of legwork. Because the phrase means as would be the case if, okay? And not leaving it there, taking it another step further to explain, right? So meaning that it was not in fact the case, right? So if you say as if, you're meaning okay, as if that were the case, which means, okay, it wasn't the case, right? So in other words, he's saying that Sako's wording was not a clue to her secret inner evil. The phrase as if is an important clue to how Ronson views the online shaming of Sako, because if you were to remove as if, then any reader would think Ronson believes that Sako's wording was in fact a clue to her secret evil, even when he thinks the exact opposite. Okay, moving to question 2. So Ronson is concerned that his responses provide quote unquote evidence for the prosecution. So what is his supposed crime and who is the prosecution? And B, what does his use of this language reveal about how he views online shaming? In other words, why does he use words like prosecution and crime? Okay, so our sample strong response. The supposed crime that Ronson committed was that he had written an attack on social justice by defending white privilege. And really, you'll notice here that this is actually too close of a paraphrase to the original. So technically, this is plagiarism. So if we say an attack, right, on social justice, that's an exact phrase from the quotation, and so it would need quotation marks around it. And this idea of defending white privilege, that's also too close, right? Okay, so the prosecution that Ronson refers to is the group of people online shaming him. So the use of language suggests that the online shamers had placed Sacco on trial and that she didn't receive a fair one because she wasn't given the opportunity to defend herself or to provide evidence of her motive, which she claims was not racist. As Ronson says later in the article, what's wrong with a bit of waiting for evidence, right? So again, evidence, another word that he uses to evoke this idea of a trial, right? And so again, a close reading strategy is not only to just look at individual words and what they reveal to us about a writer's attitude, for example, but also patterns of word choice, right? So again, we get crime, we get prosecution, we get evidence. So Ronson's use of language that is associated with the trial then emphasizes the irony that those who were pursuing social justice had in fact committed an injustice by giving Sacco an unfair trial, during which they did not adequately distinguish between serious and unserious transgressions, right? And that's a key point in Ronson's article, as we'll see in a later question. So Sacco's crime, Ronson indicates, was an unserious transgression, a misworded tweet. And the punishment she received for this quote unquote crime, the supposed crime, was excessive, far too severe, in his opinion. Okay, so what was most important here is that we get to identifying what the pattern is here, right? So these are all terms associated with the trial. associated with a system of justice. Okay, and then taking the next step. Okay, so what is he suggesting by evoking this idea of a trial, right? That online shamers in pursuit of social justice had put Justine Sacco on trial. Well, he's indicating that was an unfair trial, right? So, you know, if you think of an actual courtroom trial, she would have a chance to defend herself, to offer evidence of what her motive was, right? In our justice system, motives do matter, right? They determine whether, um, right, if you think of like the ultimate crime of murder, right? Was it premeditated? Did you plan, intend, right, to go in and do this? What was your motive? Um, as opposed to if it was an accident, right? Then it's involuntary manslaughter. And so the punishments, right, are adjusted based on motive and intention. Um, and that wasn't taken into account with Justine, who wasn't able to defend herself. Okay, so we shift to question 3. According to Ronson, how did the online threats aimed at him differ from those directed at Justine Sacco, and why? So here, Ronson's main point is gender, right? So the online threats aimed at him were different from those directed at Justine, mostly because Justine is a woman and online shamers treat women more harshly. Okay, Justine was actually getting death threats, whereas Ronson was not. And we add a quotation to support that response, those claims. So I'm really sorry if you're getting death threats, she emailed back. No one should receive threats or words of violence at all. As Justine was receiving death threats and words of violence, Ronson was, for the most part, being called names rather than being threatened. As when it comes to online shaming, he's noticed women get it worse than men. Well, nobody's threatening to actually kill me, I replied. And this is the key sentence, which is why I've highlighted it here, right? So this is the quotation that has the answer contained within it. So as is often the case with shamings, the range of insults leveled against Justine, a woman, had been far broader than those leveled against me, a man, right? And so the main differences here is not only what their crimes were, but the fact that, as Ronson argues, right, women are subject to much harsher online shaming, more violent language than men are. Okay, so question 4. So Ronson writes, I wrote about Justine not because I identified with her, although I did, but because I identified with the people who tore her apart. And notice the violence there, right? Again, of this online shaming. So it's all language, but there is certainly a violence that is produced or felt, experienced by that language. So why does Ronson identify with the people who tore her apart? For Ronson and the people who tore her apart, what are they using social media like Twitter to accomplish? In other words, why are they tearing people apart on social media? Okay, and so this response kind of demonstrates that a longer response isn't always stronger, right? So in other words, you know, I don't assign points based on how long your answer is. The idea is, do you answer the question directly, and do you support it with textual evidence and explain that evidence? So in other words, are you performing the answer, support, and explain methods? So people like Ronson and the people who tore her apart are using social media to get social justice. And that's the clincher here, right? So they're doing this online shaming in the pursuit of social justice. So throughout the article, he says, we and us, referring to the people of social media who use shaming in order to get what they consider to be social justice. So he says that he considers himself a social justice person, meaning that the people tearing her apart do as well. Therefore, identifies with those who online shame in the pursuit of social justice. Okay, and so question 4 was just intended to make that really clear, right? So we're not just talking about any online shamers, right? There's a whole lot of shaming and flaming and whatever else happens on social media, right? But he's particularly referring to people who are online shaming in order to pursue social justice, right? So they're isolating or monitoring people essentially, right? Finding people who are misusing their privilege, quote unquote, who are, you know, tweeting things that are racist, etc., right? And attacking them accordingly. Question 5, what does Ronson mean by instant cold judgment? And what is an example of it from the text? And what words or phrases does he set up in the article to function as the opposite of instant cold judgment? In other words, instead of launching into instant cold judgment, what does he want online users of social media to do when they observe a misuse of privilege? Okay, and these key terms are really important for Ronson's argument. So this notion of instant cold judgment and what he considers to be its opposite. And because those are such important key terms for Ronson, they're going to be really important for quiz 6 as you're making connections between Larson and Ronson. Okay, and so they're going to be important for quiz 6, which means they're also, of course, important for essay 2. So our response, part A. So the phrase instant cold judgment means people jumping right to a conclusion without any thoughts and reflections of it. Without, oh, this should read, and I'll fix this, without evidence, right? This idea of waiting for a bit of evidence. So the example we get from the text is when Rachel Dolezal, a civil rights activist, faked being Black. When social media got a hold of that, there was instant cold judgment. And then we get an example. So Rachel Dolezal, you can appreciate a culture without appropriating it. So the fact that you can't grasp that is one reason you're a racist idiot. And Rachel Dolezal has been living in blackface her whole life. Seems cut and dry racist to me. The online shamers judged her immediately and went straight for the jugular, assuming the worst, all without waiting for evidence. That would indicate what her motive was, why she did what she did. And again, that all ties back into the idea that she was put on trial and it was an unfair trial. So B, Ronson states that in the early days, Twitter was a place of curiosity and empathy. Back then, people might have responded to this woman, "Are you okay?" or "What was it like?" Curiosity and empathy are what Ronson considers to be the opposite of instant cold judgment. Okay, and so I've bolded that because that's our direct answer to the question that was posed in part B. So these key terms, curiosity and empathy, again, very important key terms, and they're considered Ronson sets them up to be the opposite of instant cold judgment. So these qualities of curiosity and empathy drive people to ask the question, why? And so certainly you got a good deal of credit if you didn't bring in curiosity, empathy, but you did bring in this question, why, which is closely related to curiosity and empathy. So these qualities drive people to ask the question, why, which Ronson describes as a journalist's favorite question. Ronson models, and this is some strong analysis here, right? So Ronson models curiosity and empathy for his readers when he asks the following questions about the motive behind Dolezal's impersonation of an African-American woman. So in other words, Ronson just doesn't say to us directly, look, here when I'm talking about Dolezal, I'm demonstrating for you what curiosity and empathy is, right? So the writer of this response has performed some analysis, some intellectual work in order to figure out that that's how that part of the essay is functioning in terms of Ronson's overall argument, right? So he's modeling this curiosity and empathy. So mysterious and complicated. So in other words, he's not oversimplifying what happened, right? So he's not instantly coming to this conclusion that, right, it seems cut and dry racist. Okay, so for him, it's mysterious and complicated. So what led her to fake being Black? Maybe she has a mental illness, or maybe she doesn't. Maybe she feels about color the way some transgender people feel about gender, or maybe she doesn't feel that way. So in other words, Ronson doesn't jump to conclusions, doesn't use instant cold judgment, but instead explores possible reasons why, again, this question of why, of motive, Dolezal may have done what she did, reasons that include, but are not limited to, being a racist. So in other words, he doesn't conclude either way conclusively, right? He's saying, well, maybe she is racist, maybe she isn't, maybe she has a mental illness, maybe she doesn't, right? And so he's waiting, right, to put in his verdict here for evidence that would allow him to decide what her motive was. So we move to question 6. So Ronson writes, we were unpaid interns for a company that didn't care about us. What is an intern? According to Ronson, how were Twitter and Google users functioning as unpaid interns for these companies? And what point is he making here? Okay, and so one thing I want to draw our attention to before I move to the response is that for these quizzes during the first half of the semester, I'm sometimes breaking down the question into the steps you need to follow to respond to it fully and successfully. And when we start moving into the second half of the semester, I won't do that anymore. So we'll practice kind of reading these questions and breaking them down into the steps that you have to follow. And the reason for that is, again, these quizzes are designed not only to assess your knowledge and understanding of the text, but also to help you practice um, asking interpretive questions of a text, right? That will lead you to claims you can support in your analytic essays. And also, it's just practice breaking down a prompt in order to be able to answer it directly, right? And you'll do this, of course, in XPOS in your essay prompts, as you're doing for the essay prompts for this course as well. Okay, so um, so the second half of the semester, this question would read, Ronson writes, we were unpaid interns for a company that didn't care for us. And this part wouldn't be here, right? So in this part of the question, I'm reminding you, okay, as you're answering this, define what an intern is, right? And that's going to strengthen your response. Okay, so this wouldn't show up then. According to Ronson, how are Twitter and Google users functioning as unpaid interns for these companies? And what point is he making here? Right? Okay, so an intern can be defined as a student or trainee who can work without pay to gain work experience. Although would be considered the full definition of an intern, Ronson is only referring to part of the definition that focuses on the intern being unpaid, right? So in other words, he's not really interested in this experience part of it. What he's taking from the definition of intern is this idea that they're not paid. So according to Ronson, Twitter and Google users function as unpaid interns because every time an online shaming occurs, Twitter and Google made money. Okay, so we're bringing in a quotation from the text to work with. So platforms like Twitter and Google make money when more people use their platform. This being said, an online shaming on Twitter will draw people to use Twitter, therefore making Twitter more money. Since the marginalized or voiceless have the ability to feel heard when they online shame, it's not surprising that large masses of people are drawn to a viral video or shaming to make them feel heard, which ends up making social media companies money. And the fact that Twitter didn't rule in favor, and this is kind of an added bonus that makes this response really nice and full. And the fact that Twitter didn't rule in favor of Ronson when he filed a complaint about, quote unquote, the man who pretending to be me commended the Charleston racist murderer, supports his claim that companies like Twitter are more interested in making money off of online shaming than in protecting their users by upholding their own policies. Right? So Twitter has an impersonation policy, as Ronson indicates. Okay, so yeah, the idea is that, okay, well, online shaming brings more traffic to the social media platform, and that means extra advertising dollars, et cetera, right? So it means more money for these companies. So they don't really have a business interest in protecting their users, right? They benefit when users actually are attacked and impersonated. Okay, so question 7. Ronson writes that using social media to distribute those videos was a world away from the Justine Sacco witch hunt. So what were those videos that he's referring to here, and what makes distributing them a world away from the Justine Sacco shaming? How does Ronson use this distinction between distributing these videos and Sacco shaming to make clear when he thinks online shaming is and is not okay? Okay, and again, here I'm kind of breaking this down for you a little bit, and so you won't see a follow-up question like this in the second half of the semester. So when does he think online shaming is and is not okay, right? So in other words, if this is the question, you know, how does the distinction make clear when he thinks online shaming is and is not? In order to fully answer that question, you have to define when he thinks it is and is not okay. Okay, so our response, when Ronson writes, quote, using social media to distribute those videos was a world away from the Justine Sacco witch hunt, he implies that it is sometimes appropriate to online shame, but that was not the case with Justine Sacco. So Ronson uses the term witch hunt to describe how Justine Sacco was online shamed. This word has a negative connotation, meaning someone is being attacked simply because their views are unpopular. Therefore, by using the word witch hunt to describe Sacco's shaming, Ronson reveals that he doesn't agree with the shaming. He believes that Justine Sacco has been falsely accused, not of being a witch in this case, but of being a racist. Okay, so one of the things that makes this response so strong, as I've indicated here in my marginal comments, we have close reading, right? And really successful close reading. And so you see here, we're getting ready for the close reading. The writer is using one of our close reading verbs. And here, how they're close reading, they've used that strategy that we discussed in our close reading video earlier in the semester, where take a particular word and look it up in the dictionary and use those definitions and the associations and connotation that word has to develop your close reading. And so here, right, the writer has taken the word witch hunt out of the quotation, right? So they're re-quoting it, and they've looked it up in a dictionary, right? And so we can tell they looked it up in a dictionary here, right? So, okay, it has a negative connotation, but we don't stop there. We want to explain what that negative connotation is. So, right, it implies that someone's being attacked kind of undeservedly, right? Simply because their views are unpopular or strange or considered strange. So therefore, by using the word witch hunt to describe her shaming, Ronson reveals, right, it's another close reading verb, that he doesn't agree with his shaming. And that's again a unit 2 question, right? How does a particular word choice or phrase or image, how does that reveal the writer's attitude toward what they're discussing? So if we continue, so he argues that her comment was intended to mock her own bubble of privilege and that her real crime was simply poor phraseology. Okay, and I think this is a strong example too, right, in your body paragraph. So you're going to bring in your core quotations, one from each text, where you have 1 to 2 sentences in the quotation. Okay, but as you're providing context or developing or explaining that connection more fully, you can bring in just chunks of quotations, so not a full sentence. And we see that working really well here, right? So this phrase intended to mock our own bubble of privilege, and also poor phraseology, right? We didn't need the full sentence there. We can just pluck those little chunks, and that helps to make our discussion very specific and accurate. So her crime, in other words, was here we go again with the snippets of quotation, unserious transgression, where the videos that were being circulated of police brutality against people of color served as evidence, right? And again, tying into Ronson's argument that, right, we need to wait for evidence. We shouldn't be launching into instant cold judgment here. Okay, so her crime was unserious, an unserious transgression, whereas the videos that were being circulated of police brutality against people of color served as evidence of serious transgressions against social justice, right? Therefore, because these videos served as evidence of serious transgressions, people like Michael Brown died as a result of police brutality. This would be a case where online shaming would be appropriate, according to Ronson. So in other words, the way in which these examples, right, Justine Sacco's tweet and these videos, they're a world away because one's a serious transgression and one's an unserious transgression. And so it's an important point that Ronson is making here, that we as in social media users who are online shaming in pursuit of social justice, we need to distinguish between serious and unserious transgressions, right? So he goes on to argue that misuse of privilege has become a devalued term because it's getting thrown at everybody, right? Whether the supposed crime was serious or unserious. So we need to distinguish between those. And so he's providing an example of distinguishing between serious and unserious transgressions when he distinguishes Sacco's tweet, right, from these videos of police brutality. And so it was important in your response here when you talk about videos to not only talk about the video where the police officer goes to the pool party, right, where the kids are, and he tackles the girl in the bikini, right? So you can certainly mention that, but here the question asks or refers to videos, right? Plural. So what's being referred to are the police brutality videos, right, that are being circulated. And by the way, in terms of connections, right, those were the videos that were being circulated during the first act of social media activism, right, of Black Lives Matter, as who would point out. Okay, so when we move to question 8 then, so we're kind of pulling everything together. And so this question, of course, is really important when we're thinking about our drafts of essay 2. So what does Ronson mean by the phrase surveillance society, which he introduces at the very end of his essay? So how is the surveillance society related to the online shaming that he describes in the article? Right, so surveillance society is a really important key term for him, even though he only introduces it at the very end. So basically we have to work backwards to see where that idea is implied in his discussion of online shaming. So Ronson is calling social media a surveillance society because a lot of people on social media have created a toxic environment where some people are afraid to speak their minds. This is evident when he says, and here's our textual evidence, right, to support this claim. The great thing about social media was how it gave a voice to voiceless people. The smartest way to survive is to go back to being voiceless. So this is because these voiceless people are afraid to be attacked, as Ronson himself was attacked, for having a different opinion than someone else online, right? And that relates back to that word witch hunt. The people shaming online have created a society of surveillance where they are constantly monitoring people and what they say, and at any moment can attack someone, like the turns Ronson describes that circled above me for a while, gaining a consensus, and then began to dive bomb pecking at my head. The sense of people's feeding off of one another as they decide who to and whether to online shame plays a large role in creating an atmosphere of surveillance. Okay, and so this response to is strong, right? And we get this integration of textual material that pulls together different parts of the article, right? So it's certainly addressing surveillance society, which is that quotation is at the end of the essay, but we're going earlier into the essay to pull textual evidence to help us answer. And so notice, right, so we have a quotation from page 6, but we also have a couple quotations from page 2, right? And so here I've highlighted monitoring because, again, this is another example where going to a dictionary is a great way to brainstorm so that you can develop a discussion of a quotation or a key term, right? And so here, right, to discuss surveillance society, then, you know, surveillance is defined in terms of monitoring, right? So you're monitoring people's behavior, you're surveilling them. And so this word gives us a nice jumping off point to move from paraphrasing the quotation to close reading and analysis. Okay, and also, you know, this kind of going to this example of the turns, I think is important because it emphasizes, you know, the part of Ronson's argument where he's kind of saying, look, online shaming has a lot to do with groupthink, right? So people are kind of doing what other people are doing, right? And so the image of the turns circling ahead, overhead, right? So they weren't immediately dive bombing. They were kind of getting a sense of each other, right? Are we mad? Are we not mad? I don't know. What do we do? And then they reach a consensus and dive bomb, right? So that idea of group think is certainly, as opposed to individual thinking, right, is important for Ronson's argument. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll pause and do a few questions. So as a reminder, right, as we're getting to midterm and we're going to do a midterm self-assessment and survey of the course to kind of chart our progress. So we want to keep in mind as we do that, what is considered passing for a quiz, right? So what percentage is considered passing according to writing program policy? In other words, what percentage would you have to achieve on a quiz in order to pass it? Okay, I'll give you a moment. Great. So question 2. So a paraphrase of a sentence that you take from a text, in other words, a quotation, is considered too close if you copy one of two things, right? So if you copy an author's blank or an author's blank. So again, a paraphrase of a sentence is considered too close if one of what two things is copied. Okay, so yeah, so 70% is considered passing on a quiz according to the writing program. And your paraphrase is considered too close and therefore plagiarism if you copy either particular words or phrases from the text, from the sentence from the text, or the original sentence structure. Okay. And question 3, just to re-emphasize this so we're ready to have this in mind when we take the synthesis quiz 6, putting Ronson and Larson together into conversation. So when Ronson uses the word we, what particular group of people does he have in mind? And be as specific as possible. So by using we, he's referring not only to social media users, right? That's a very general, large group, but in particular, social media users who are engaging in online shaming. But again, not just any social media users engaged in online shaming, those who are online shaming in the pursuit of social justice, right? So you need all of those elements to correctly define Ronson's specific audience that he has in mind to target to change their view, their attitude toward online shaming. And when Ronson uses words like crime, prosecution, evidence, what is he suggesting about about Sacco's shaming? So all of those words are associated with the trial, as we mentioned, and a criminal justice system. And so he's suggesting that Sacco's shaming was a trial by Twitter, as he puts it right at the beginning of the article underneath the title. Okay, so with that trial, he suggests that it was unfair. So why did he consider Justine Sacco's trial to be unfair? Right, so Ronson considers her trial to have been unfair because she wasn't allowed to defend herself. And the prosecution, right, those who were online shaming her in the pursuit of social justice, um, didn't wait for evidence. They didn't examine evidence before they launched into their judgment and their punishment. Okay, and what key terms does Ronson set up as the opposite of instant cold judgment? Right, so Ronson sets up the key terms curiosity and empathy as the opposite of instant cold judgment. And curiosity and empathy are driven by the question why, right? The journalist's favorite question. Okay, so again, once everyone completes this video activity, I'll publish this document on Canvas. And so you can have this as a resource as you move forward into the reading quiz for Ronson and Larson, reading quiz 6, and also as you revise your rough drafts of essay 2. Okay, take care. I'll see you next time.